The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Tessa Morgan raced toward Silver Creek, her heart pounding in time with her mare's galloping stride. The year was 1878, and the Wyoming territory stretched before her like an endless canvas painted in hues of amber and gold by the setting sun. She had just 3 days to reach her uncle's ranch before the bank foreclosed on the property, 3 days to save the only family she had left in this world. "Come on, Belle," she urged, her voice carried away by the wind that tugged at her chestnut hair. "Just a few more miles." The small frontier town of Silver Creek emerged on the horizon, its weathered buildings standing defiant against the vast wilderness. Tessa had been warned about traveling alone, especially with night approaching, but desperation had pushed caution aside. The weight of the leather pouch tucked inside her riding coat, containing the hard-earned money she'd saved working as a schoolteacher in Cheyenne, was both comforting and concerning. In these lawless territories, a woman alone with money was a dangerous combination. As darkness fell, Tessa guided her exhausted mare down the main street, passing the general store and blacksmith. Both shuttered for the night. The only building showing signs of life was the Silver Dollar Saloon, its windows glowing with lantern light while raucous laughter and piano music spilled into the street. "I'll find a room at the boarding house and set out at first light," Tessa murmured to Belle as she dismounted in front of the livery stable. She stroked the horse's muzzle, grateful for the loyal companion who had carried her so far. A sound behind her boots scraping against dirt made her turn sharply. 3 men emerged from the shadows between buildings, their faces obscured by the brim of their hats. "Well, look what we got here, boys," the tallest one drawled, stepping into the pool of moonlight. His face was weathered and scarred, eyes gleaming with malicious intent. A lost little lady with a mighty fine horse. Tessa's hand instinctively moved toward the small derringer concealed in her pocket. "I'm not lost. I'm just passing through town." The men exchanged amused glances. "Traveling alone? That ain't proper for a lady like yourself," said another, circling around to block her path to the boarding house. "Dangerous times these are." "I can manage my own safety," Tessa replied firmly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. She knew these men weren't concerned for her welfare, they were predators sensing prey. "That's a right pretty bag you're clutching, madam," the third man observed, nodding toward her coat where she'd unconsciously pressed her hand against the money pouch. "What's a woman like you doing with such valuables?" Before Tessa could respond, the tallest man lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Let's discuss this somewhere more private, shall we?" "Unhand me," Tessa struggled, but his grip tightened painfully. "Boys, I think the lady needs a drink to calm her nerves," the man laughed, nodding toward the saloon. "Jasper will want to see what we found." Terror flooded Tessa's veins as they began dragging her across the street. She kicked and fought, but against 3 men her resistance was futile. One of them yanked the reins from her hand, leading Belle away toward the livery. "Help!" she screamed, her cries drowned by the piano music and carousing from the saloon. "Somebody help me!" The batwing doors of the Silver Dollar slammed open as they forced her inside. The piano player faltered, and conversations momentarily hushed as patrons turned to observe the commotion. But in a frontier town like Silver Creek, few were willing to interfere in others' business, especially when it involved Jasper Wilkes's men. The saloon was thick with cigar smoke and the pungent smell of whiskey. Card games paused as Tessa was pushed through the crowd toward a corner table where a man in an expensive black suit sat counting money. His silver hair was slicked back beneath a black hat, and a thin mustache adorned his upper lip. "Jasper," the tall man called, "found this one sneaking into town. carrying valuables. The well-dressed man looked up, his cold eyes appraising Tessa like she was livestock at auction. "And who might you be, my dear?" "Someone who wishes to be left alone," Tessa replied, lifting her chin despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her. "I demand you tell these men to release me." Jasper Wilkes laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You're not in a position to demand anything, miss." "Morgan, Tessa Morgan," she answered, deciding that honesty might be her best strategy. "I'm traveling to my uncle's ranch. These men accosted me without provocation." Wilkes waved a dismissive hand. "My boys are just looking out for a lone woman's safety. Silver Creek can be dangerous after dark." His eyes narrowed. "Now about these valuables." Tessa clutched her coat tighter. "My personal belongings are none of your concern." "Everything in Silver Creek is my concern," Wilkes replied, his voice hardening. "I own this town, Miss Morgan." 10 miles outside of Silver Creek, Garrett Cole made camp beneath a sprawling cottonwood tree. At 32, he'd lived enough lives for several men: cavalry scout, bounty hunter, and now a man seeking peace. His tall frame was lean and weathered from years in the saddle, his face bronzed by the sun and wind. Only his eyes, a startling blue beneath the brim of his battered hat, revealed the intelligence and determination that had kept him alive when many others had fallen. He tended the small fire, brewing coffee while his stallion, Diablo, grazed nearby. The night was quiet save for the occasional howl of a distant coyote and the soft whisper of the wind through the grass. Garrett had planned to reach Silver Creek by nightfall, but a lame horse belonging to an elderly couple had delayed him. He couldn't leave them stranded in Indian territory, so he'd helped repair their wagon wheel and escorted them to the nearest settlement. Now, with Silver Creek only an hour's ride away, he decided to wait until morning. The town had a reputation, and Garrett preferred to enter such places in daylight when he could see trouble coming. Besides, he was in no hurry. The telegram from his old friend Marshall Davis had been vague: trouble brewing in Silver Creek. Might need a steady hand, but it wasn't urgent enough to risk riding unfamiliar trails in darkness. Garrett sipped his coffee, gazing at the stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember a different life, before the war had changed everything. Before he'd buried his family and taken to the trail, unable to face the empty house and the memories it contained. "Getting soft in your old age, Cole," he muttered to himself, pouring the remaining coffee onto the ground and kicking dirt over the dying embers. As he settled against his saddle, rifle within reach, he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring more than just a reunion with an old friend. At the Silver Dollar Saloon, Tessa found herself seated at Jasper Wilkes's table, his men forming a barrier between her and the exit. The saloon had returned to its normal revelry, the piano player pounding out a lively tune as women in garish dresses circulated among the patrons. "I insist you let me go," Tessa said, her voice low but firm. "I have pressing business and must leave town by morning." Wilkes smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "No one passes through my town without paying respects and dues." He nodded to one of his men who reached inside Tessa's coat and extracted the leather pouch. "No." Tessa lunged for it, but strong hands forced her back into the chair. The man tossed the pouch to Wilkes, who opened it and whistled at the sight of the money inside. My, a schoolteacher's salary must be more generous than I realized." Tessa's eyes widened. "How did you— your hands," Wilkes replied, gesturing with the cigar he'd just lit. "Ink stains but no calluses from farm work, and that proper way of speaking. Didn't take much deduction." "That money is to save my uncle's ranch," Tessa pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, it's all I have." Wilkes pocketed the money with a shrug. Consider it a toll for safe passage through Silver Creek. You should thank me. A woman traveling alone with this much cash is asking for trouble. The only trouble I've encountered is sitting across from me, Tessa retorted, anger momentarily overriding her fear. A flash of irritation crossed Wilkes's face. Spirited, I like that. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. But understand this, Miss Morgan, I rule Silver Creek. The marshal, the bank, the businesses, they all answer to me. Your uncle's ranch, what's his name? Joseph Morgan, Tessa answered reluctantly. Recognition dawned in Wilkes's eyes. Morgan's place. That stretch along Cooper Creek, he laughed. Well, this is fortuitous. I've had my eye on that land for some time. Your uncle refused to sell to me, even when I explained how beneficial it would be for his health. Cold dread settled in Tessa's stomach. What did you do to him? Nothing yet, Wilkes said, signaling to a barmaid for more whiskey. But debts must be paid. The bank forecloses in 3 days, and I'll be there to purchase the property at auction. You orchestrated this, Tessa realized, her voice barely audible over the saloon noise. You pressured the bank to call in his loans. Wilkes shrugged unapologetically. Business, my dear, nothing personal. He gestured around the room. Silver Creek is growing. I have plans for this territory that require more land, your uncle's land specifically. I won't let you take it, Tessa said, her hands balling into fists beneath the table. And how will you stop me? Wilkes laughed. You have no money now and no friends in Silver Creek. In fact, he studied her for a moment, a calculating look in his eyes. Perhaps you could work off your debt right here. The silver dollar always needs attractive women to entertain the customers. Horror washed over Tessa. I would sooner die. That can be arranged too, Wilkes replied, his voice hardening. But it would be such a waste. He nodded to his men. Take her upstairs. Give her the night to reconsider my generous offer. Strong hands gripped Tessa's arms, hauling her to her feet as she struggled. You won't get away with this. Your uncle will be lucky to escape with his life when I'm through, Wilkes interrupted. Take her up. As they dragged her toward the stairs, Tessa fought with renewed desperation. Help me, please, someone help. But the patrons turned away, unwilling to challenge Jasper Wilkes and his men. Just as they reached the staircase, the batwing doors slammed open with enough force to rattle the bottles behind the bar. A hush fell over the saloon as a tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, the moonlight at his back casting his face in shadow. Garrett Cole stepped into the light, taking in the scene before him with a single sweeping glance. His journey to Silver Creek had been hastened by the distant sound of a woman's scream carried on the night wind. Something had compelled him to saddle Diablo and ride through the darkness, instincts honed by years on the frontier warning him that trouble wouldn't wait until morning. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the woman being manhandled toward the stairs, her face a mask of terror and defiance. In that instant, the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his emotions cracked. Something about her, the dignity in her bearing despite her circumstances, perhaps stirred memories he'd long suppressed. I believe the lady said no, Garrett stated, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. He moved forward with the fluid grace of a predator, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Jasper Wilkes rose from his table, annoyance flashing across his face. This doesn't concern you, stranger. Move along. Garrett ignored him, focusing on Tessa. Madam, are these men bothering you? Before Tessa could answer, one of Wilkes's men stepped between them. You deaf, mister. The boss said this ain't your business. Garrett's movement was so swift that few saw it happen. One moment he was standing relaxed, hands hanging loosely at his sides. The next, the man was sprawled on the floor, blood streaming from his nose where Garrett's fist had connected. "I wasn't talking to you," Garrett said mildly, stepping over the groaning man. His eyes found Tessa's again. "Madam." "They took my money," Tessa replied, her voice steady despite the men still gripping her arms. "And my horse. They're forcing me to stay against my will." Garrett nodded as if this confirmed a suspicion. "That's what I thought." He turned to Wilkes. "Return the lady's belongings. Now." A tense silence fell over the saloon. The piano player had stopped, and even the bar girls had retreated to the edges of the room, sensing the violence about to erupt. Wilkes's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know who I am, stranger." "A man about to make a decision," Garrett replied evenly. "Choose wisely." Wilkes's expression darkened. "I own Silver Creek. Every building, every business, every person, including the sheriff, who'll be happy to throw you in a cell or a pine box if you don't walk out that door right now." Garrett didn't flinch. "Last chance. Return what you took from the lady and let her go." "Boys," Wilkes said, signaling to his men, "teach our visitor some manners." The first man charged like a bull, expecting to overpower Garrett with sheer momentum. Garrett sidestepped, using the man's own weight against him to send him crashing into a table. The second man was smarter, circling cautiously before drawing a knife from his boot. "That's not very sporting," Garrett commented, reaching behind his back and producing a wicked-looking Bowie knife of his own. The blade caught the lamplight as he held it with practiced ease. The man hesitated, then lunged forward with a slashing attack. Garrett parried, the clang of metal on metal ringing through the saloon. 3 quick moves later, the man's knife skittered across the floor, and he clutched a bleeding hand to his chest. During the commotion, Tessa twisted free from the distracted grip of her captor and made a dash for the door. The man recovered quickly, snagging her arm and yanking her back with bruising force. "Let her go," Garrett warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous pitch. "Or what?" the man sneered, wrapping an arm around Tessa's throat. The answer came in the form of Garrett's fist connecting with the man's temple with such force that he dropped like a stone, releasing Tessa as he fell. Garrett steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "You all right?" he asked softly. Tessa nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the fallen men and the tensing patrons around them. "My money, he has it," she whispered, nodding toward Wilkes. Garrett turned to face Wilkes, who had drawn a revolver and was pointing it directly at them. "You've made a grave mistake," Wilkes said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No one challenges me in my own establishment." "Put it down," Garrett advised, making no move toward his own holstered weapon. "You're not fast enough. We'll see about that." Wilkes smirked, but there was uncertainty in his eyes as he assessed the calm confidence in Garrett's stance. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then, with a move so swift it seemed impossible, Garrett's hand blurred and his revolver appeared, the barrel aimed steadily at Wilkes's chest before the man could even squeeze his trigger. "Like I said," Garrett stated quietly, "not fast enough." Wilkes's face contorted with rage, but self-preservation kept his finger from completing its deadly task. "Who are you?" "Name's Garrett Cole. Now, I believe you have something that belongs to the lady." A flicker of recognition crossed Wilkes's face at the name. He slowly lowered his gun. "Cole. I've heard of you, thought you'd retired from bounty hunting." "I have," Garrett confirmed, "just passing through, but I still don't take kindly to seeing a woman mistreated." He extended his free hand toward Wilkes. "The money." With reluctance, Wilkes reached into his pocket and produced Tessa's leather pouch. "Take it, but know this: you've made an enemy today." "Wouldn't be the first time," Garrett replied, taking the pouch and passing it to Tessa without taking his eyes off Wilkes. "Where's her horse?" "Livery," Wilkes ground out. Garrett nodded to Tessa. Let's go. They backed toward the door, Garrett keeping his weapon trained on Wilkes and his recovering men. As they reached the batwing doors, Wilkes called out, "This isn't over, Cole, not by a long shot." "Usually isn't," Garrett agreed, ushering Tessa outside before following her into the night air. The street was deserted, the town silent save for the muted sounds from the saloon behind them. Garrett holstered his revolver, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. "Thank you," Tessa said, clutching her recovered money pouch tightly. "I dread to think what would have happened if you hadn't arrived when you did." "No need for thanks," Garrett replied, his voice gentler than before. "No decent man would stand by while a lady was in trouble." He gestured toward the livery stable. "Let's get your horse and find somewhere safe for the night." As they walked, Tessa studied her rescuer in the moonlight. He moved with the confident grace of a man accustomed to danger, yet there was something in his manner, a controlled restraint, perhaps that suggested he was more than just another gun for hire. "I'm Tessa Morgan," she offered. "Garrett Cole," he replied with a slight nod. "What brings you to a place like Silver Creek alone, Miss Morgan?" Tessa hesitated, then decided that the man who had just risked his life for her deserved the truth. "I'm trying to save my uncle's ranch. The bank is foreclosing and I brought money to pay off the loan." Her voice hardened. "Now I understand why. That man, Wilkes, orchestrated the whole thing to get my uncle's land." Garrett's expression darkened. "Sounds like Wilkes. He has a reputation that stretches beyond Silver Creek." He paused, considering. "Your uncle is that Joseph Morgan of Cooper Creek Ranch." Surprise flashed across Tessa's face. "Yes, do you know him?" "We've crossed paths," Garrett said, a hint of respect in his tone. "Good man. Helped me track some rustlers a few years back." They reached the livery stable, finding it locked for the night. Garrett made quick work of the simple latch and led Tessa inside, where several horses dozed in their stalls. Belle nickered softly when she caught Tessa's scent. "There you are," Tessa murmured, stroking the mare's velvet nose. "Ready to get out of here tonight?" Garrett asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's dangerous riding these trails in the dark, especially with Wilkes's men likely to come looking for retribution." "I can't stay in Silver Creek," Tessa insisted. "Not with them after me, and I need to reach my uncle's ranch as soon as possible." Garrett considered her words, then nodded. "All right, but you're not traveling alone. I'll escort you." Tessa straightened, pride momentarily overriding gratitude. "That's not necessary, Mr. Cole. I've imposed enough on your kindness already." A ghost of a smile touched Garrett's lips. "It wasn't an offer, Miss Morgan. Wilkes isn't a man who forgets an insult. He'll send men after you, after us both now." As if to punctuate his words, shouts erupted from the direction of the saloon, followed by the sound of running boots on the hard, packed dirt. "Saddle up," Garrett ordered, moving quickly to where his own horse, Diablo, had been stabled. "We need to leave. Now." Tessa didn't argue further, efficiently preparing Belle while Garrett readied his stallion. Within minutes, they were mounted and slipping out the back of the livery into the alley behind. "Stay close," Garrett whispered, guiding Diablo toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open country. They rode in tense silence, keeping to the shadows until the last structure was behind them. Just as they urged their horses into a gallop, a shout went up from the town. "There they are, riders heading east." Gunshots cracked through the night air, bullets whistling harmlessly over their heads as the distance between them and their pursuers grew. "Keep riding," Garrett called to Tessa over the thundering hooves. "Don't stop until I say." They raced across the open plains, the moonlight illuminating their path as Silver Creek faded into the distance behind them. Tessa leaned low over Belle's neck, the wind whipping through her hair as they galloped toward freedom, and toward an uncertain journey with a mysterious man who had just turned his life upside down for a woman he didn't know. After an hour of hard riding with no sign of pursuit, Garrett finally signaled for them to slow their pace. The horses were lathered with sweat, their breathing labored from the sustained gallop. "We need to rest them," he said, guiding Diablo toward a cluster of cottonwoods near a small creek. "Just long enough to catch their wind. We can't risk stopping longer." They dismounted in the shelter of the trees, leading their horses to the water. The night had deepened, the stars brilliant in the clear Wyoming sky. Tessa shivered slightly as the adrenaline wore off, leaving her exhausted and newly aware of the night's chill. "Here," Garrett said, noticing her discomfort. He shrugged out of his duster and placed it around her shoulders. The coat was warm from his body and smelled of leather, tobacco, and the open prairie. "Thank you," Tessa said, pulling it closer. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't dwell on it," Garrett interrupted gently. "What matters is what happens next." He crouched by the creek, filling his canteen while keeping a watchful eye on their back trail. Tessa took the opportunity to study him more closely. In the starlight, she could see that his face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. His eyes, however, held a weariness that spoke of having seen too much of life's hardships. "Why did you come to Silver Creek?" she asked, curious about the man who had risked so much for a stranger. Garrett stood, capping his canteen. "An old friend, Marshall Davis, sent word about trouble brewing. Asked me to look into it. You're a lawman, used to be, among other things." He offered no further explanation. "Your uncle's ranch how far?" "About 20 miles north of here," Tessa replied. "We could reach it by mid-morning if we ride at dawn." Garrett nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We should keep moving for another hour, put more distance between us and Wilkes's men. Then we'll find somewhere to rest until first light." As they prepared to mount up again, a sound caught Garrett's attention, the distant drumming of hooves. He tensed, hand dropping to his revolver. "Mount up," he ordered quietly. "Quickly." They rode deeper into the night, away from the main trail, Garrett leading them through terrain that would be difficult to track. When they finally stopped again, they had reached a secluded box canyon with steep walls that offered protection on 3 sides. "We'll rest here," Garrett decided, helping Tessa dismount. "I'll take first watch." Despite her exhaustion, Tessa protested. "You need rest too, I can keep watch." Garrett's expression softened slightly. "I'm used to going without sleep, Miss Morgan. You've had a trying day." "Tessa," she corrected him. "After what we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tessa, then, get some rest. I'll wake you if there's trouble." Tessa settled against her saddle, wrapped in Garrett's duster. Despite her intention to stay awake, the events of the day soon caught up with her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. In her dreams, she was back in the saloon, rough hands dragging her up the stairs while faceless men laughed. She struggled, calling for help, but no one came. Then suddenly, the batwing doors flew open and a figure stepped through, not Garrett this time, but her father, dead these past 5 years. He reached for her, but the distance between them kept growing. "Tessa!" A gentle hand on her shoulder brought her back to wakefulness with a gasp. Garrett was crouched beside her, concern evident in his eyes. "You were dreaming." She sat up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, did I make noise?" "Nothing to be sorry for," he assured her, offering a tin cup of coffee. "Dawn's breaking. We should move soon." The eastern sky was lightening, the first hints of gold and pink touching the horizon. Tessa accepted the coffee gratefully, its warmth spreading through her chilled body. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noting the alertness in Garrett's gaze despite the night watch. "Enough," he replied, which Tessa suspected meant not at all. He turned, checking Diablo's saddle. "Your uncle, will he be at the ranch?" "Unless things have changed drastically since my last letter, yes." Tessa hesitated. "Mr. Cole, Garrett, I want you to know that I don't expect you to accompany me all the way. You've already done more than enough." Garrett straightened, regarding her steadily. "I told you, Wilkes isn't a man who forgives easily. He'll send men after us and they won't stop at the territory line. Besides," he added, something unreadable crossing his face, "I have unfinished business with Joseph Morgan." Before Tessa could inquire further, Garrett turned away, his attention drawn to something in the distance. "We need to go. Now." Tessa followed his gaze and saw a thin column of dust on the horizon, moving their way. Riders, and moving fast. They were mounted and moving within minutes, Garrett leading them up a narrow deer trail that wound through the rocky terrain. The path was treacherous, forcing them to ride single file and at a slower pace than Tessa would have preferred with pursuers on their trail. "Where does this lead?" she called ahead to Garrett. "Over the ridge and down to Cooper Creek," he answered without looking back. "It's longer than the main trail, but harder to follow." The sun climbed higher as they rode, the heat building despite the early hour. Tessa could feel Belle tiring beneath her, the mare's earlier exertion taking its toll. Ahead, Garrett seemed to sense the same in Diablo, occasionally pausing to let the horses catch their breath. During one such stop, as they stood on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of prairie, Tessa finally voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "What unfinished business do you have with my uncle?" Garrett's jaw tightened momentarily. "It's complicated." "We have time," Tessa insisted gently. "And I think I deserve to know, considering I'm bringing you to his doorstep." For a long moment she thought he might refuse to answer. Then he sighed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Your uncle saved my life once. I never properly thanked him." "That's all." Tessa sensed there was more to the story. Garrett turned to face her, his blue eyes intense beneath the brim of his hat. "He saved my life by taking one. Shot a man who was about to put a bullet in my back during a cattle raid." His voice grew quieter. "That man was his own brother." Shock rippled through Tessa. "Uncle Joe never mentioned having a brother." "I expect he wouldn't," Garrett replied grimly. "Marcus Morgan was the black sheep of the family. Rustler, thief, killer. He and I had history. When our paths crossed at your uncle's ranch 5 years ago, things came to a head." 5 years ago. Tessa's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "That was when Uncle Joe was shot, shortly after I left for teaching school. He nearly died." Garrett nodded solemnly. "Marcus shot him before turning on me. Joseph, wounded as he was, still managed to get to his gun. Saved my life by taking his brother's." Tessa sat back in her saddle, stunned by the revelation. "He never told me any of this. His letters only said there had been trouble with rustlers." "Some burdens are too heavy to share," Garrett said softly. "Even with family." Before Tessa could respond, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed across the canyon. Dirt kicked up mere feet from where they stood. "Ride," Garrett commanded, spurring Diablo forward as another shot rang out, closer this time. They plunged down the ridge, abandoning caution for speed as more shots followed them. Belle responded to Tessa's urgent commands, finding strength despite her fatigue as they raced toward the cover of a pine forest ahead. The trees swallowed them, branches whipping past as they navigated the dense undergrowth. Behind them, shouts and the sound of pursuit grew louder. "They're gaining," Tessa called out, fear tightening her throat. Garrett glanced back, his expression grim. "The creek's just ahead. Once across, we'll have open ground to the ranch. They won't follow us onto Morgan property, not in daylight." They burst from the forest onto the banks of Cooper Creek, the water running high and fast from recent rains. What would normally be an easy ford now looked treacherous, the current sweeping debris downstream at an alarming rate. "Can the horses make it?" Tessa asked, eyeing the churning water with apprehension. "They'll have to," Garrett replied, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "You go first, I'll cover you." Tessa hesitated, reluctant to leave him facing their pursuers alone. "Go," he insisted more forcefully. "Your uncle needs to be warned. I'll be right behind you." With a nod, Tessa urged Belle into the water. The mare balked at first, then plunged forward, fighting the current that immediately tried to sweep them downstream. The water was ice cold, shocking Tessa's system as it rose to her knees, then her waist as Belle lost her footing momentarily in the middle of the creek. "Keep going," Garrett shouted from the bank, his rifle cracking as the first of their pursuers emerged from the tree line. Belle found purchase again, struggling toward the opposite shore with determined strides. As they neared the bank, shots kicked up water around them, one passing so close that Tessa felt the wind of its passing. With a final surge of strength, Belle clambered up the muddy bank. Tessa turned immediately, her heart in her throat as she watched Garrett back Diablo into the water, firing methodically at the men taking cover among the trees. "Hurry," she called, drawing her own small derringer, though it would be useless at this distance. Diablo fought the current valiantly, the powerful stallion making better progress than Belle had. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A bullet found its mark, not in Garrett but in Diablo's shoulder. The horse reared in pain, nearly unseating his rider before plunging forward with renewed desperation. 3/4 of the way across, Diablo stumbled, the current seizing both horse and rider. For a heart-stopping moment, they disappeared beneath the surface. Tessa cried out in horror, scanning the churning water desperately. Downstream, Garrett surfaced, fighting to keep his head above water while still gripping Diablo's reins. The injured horse was struggling, but still swimming, dragged by the current toward a tangle of downed trees that formed a natural dam. Tessa spurred Belle along the bank, racing to intercept them. She reached the logjam just as Garrett and Diablo were swept into it. Garrett managed to grab a branch, holding fast while helping Diablo find footing in the shallower water behind the barrier. "Take my hand," Tessa called, dismounting and wading into the edge of the creek, arm extended. Garrett reached for her, their fingers brushing before connecting in a firm grip. With a strength that belied her slender frame, Tessa helped pull him from the water onto the bank where he collapsed, gasping for breath. "Diablo," he managed between breaths, looking back at his horse. "I'll get him," Tessa assured him, wading back to where the stallion stood trembling in the shallows, blood staining the water around his shoulder. With gentle words and firm guidance, she led the injured animal to shore where Garrett was now sitting up, water streaming from his clothes. "Are you hurt?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He shook his head, eyes scanning the opposite bank where their pursuers had gathered, apparently unwilling to attempt the dangerous crossing. "They'll look for another way across," he said grimly. "We need to keep moving." "Diablo can't carry you," Tessa observed, examining the horse's wound. "The bullet passed clean through, but he needs rest and treatment." Garrett stood, swaying slightly before finding his balance. "Then we walk. The ranch can't be more than 3 miles from here." "We can both ride Belle," Tessa suggested. "She's tired but strong enough to carry us at a walk." Garrett shook his head. "Too much weight would slow her to a crawl. I'll lead Diablo. You ride ahead and warn your uncle." "I'm not leaving you," Tessa said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "We stay together." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. After a moment he nodded. "Together, then." They set off, Tessa walking alongside Belle while Garrett led the limping Diablo. The sun beat down mercilessly as they crossed the open grassland, the Cooper Creek ranch buildings shimmering like a mirage in the distance. "Tell me about your uncle," Garrett said after they had been walking in silence for some time. "Beyond what I already know." Tessa sensed he was trying to distract her from their situation, but welcomed the conversation nonetheless. "He raised me after my parents died in a fever epidemic when I was 12, taught me everything riding, shooting, even reading and writing when the nearest school was 2 days' ride away." "He did a fine job," Garrett observed. "Not many women would have handled what you've been through with such courage." Tessa felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "What about you? Do you have family?" A shadow crossed Garrett's face. "Not anymore. Lost my wife and son to Comanche raiders while I was away fighting in the war. By the time I got back to Texas." He trailed off, the pain still evident despite the years that had passed. "I'm sorry," Tessa said softly, understanding now the weariness she had seen in his eyes. "It was a long time ago," Garrett replied, though his tone suggested the wound was still raw. They walked on, the ranch growing steadily larger on the horizon. As they crested a small rise, Tessa suddenly stopped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Smoke was rising from the direction of the ranch buildings. "No," she whispered. "Uncle Joe." Without warning, she swung onto Belle's back and spurred the tired mare into a gallop, racing toward the smoke with fear driving her forward. Behind her, she heard Garrett call her name, but she couldn't stop, not with the possibility that her uncle, the only family she had left, might be in danger. As she drew closer, the scene became clearer. The smoke wasn't coming from the main house, but from the barn, which was fully engulfed in flames. Men were forming a bucket line from the well, fighting desperately to keep the fire from spreading to nearby structures. Tessa rode directly to the house, swinging down from Belle's back before the horse had fully stopped. She burst through the front door, calling for her uncle. "Uncle Joe, Uncle Joe, where are you?" a gruff voice answered from the sitting room. "Tessa, is that you, girl?" Relief flooded through her as she rushed into the room to find Joseph Morgan sitting in his armchair, a rifle across his lap. He was a big man, though thinner than she remembered, with a thick gray beard and the same green eyes she had inherited from her father, his brother. "Uncle Joe," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "Thank God you're safe. I saw the smoke and feared the worst." He hugged her tightly before holding her at arm's length, his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance. "What in tarnation are you doing here, girl? And looking like you've been through hell itself." Before she could answer, a commotion at the door drew their attention. 2 ranch hands entered, supporting Garrett between them, Diablo's reins in the hand of a third man. "Found this fella on the North Road, boss," one of the hands explained. "Said he's with Miss Tessa." Joseph Morgan stared at Garrett for a long moment, recognition and disbelief warring in his expression. "Cole, Garrett Cole," Garrett straightened, shaking off the supporting hands. "Been a long time, Joseph." The older man stood slowly, his movements stiff as if from an old injury. 5 years. Never thought I'd see you again." His eyes narrowed. "What are you doing with my niece?" "It's a long story, Uncle," Tessa intervened, sensing the tension. "He saved my life in Silver Creek." "Jasper Wilkes and his men, Wilkes." Joseph spat the name like a curse. "So he's made his move at last." Garrett nodded grimly. "He orchestrated the bank foreclosure to get your land. When Tessa arrived with money to pay off the loan, his men tried to take it in her." Joseph's weathered face darkened with anger. "Those bastards! Was it them who set my barn ablaze too?" "Most likely," Garrett confirmed. "How many men do you have, Joseph?" "6 hands, all loyal, but Williams and Peters are in town getting supplies." The older man moved to the window, looking out at the smoldering remains of his barn. 4 men against Wilkes's gang, not good odds. 5, Tessa corrected firmly. I can shoot. Both men turned to her with identical expressions of protest, which she silenced with a raised hand. This is my home too, I'll defend it. Before either could argue, the sound of hoofbeats approaching drew their attention. One of the ranch hands rushed in, his face grim. Riders coming, Mr. Morgan, at least a dozen. Looks like Wilkes's men. Joseph's expression hardened. So it begins. He turned to Tessa. Get to the root cellar. There's a trapdoor that leads to a tunnel. It comes out a 1/4 mile from the house near the creek. I won't leave you, Tessa insisted. This isn't open for discussion, her uncle replied sternly. If something happens to me, the ranch is yours. You need to survive to keep it from Wilkes. He's right, Garrett added, checking his revolver. You should go. Tessa looked between the 2 men, frustration and fear warring within her. I didn't come all this way, fight so hard, just to run and hide now. Joseph softened slightly, placing a weathered hand on her cheek. You're just like your father, stubborn as a mule, he sighed. Fine, but you stay in the house, away from windows. Use that little pepper box of yours only if they get inside. Understood? Tessa nodded reluctantly. Understood. Garrett moved to the window, peering out at the approaching riders. They're spreading out, surrounding the house. Joseph gestured to his remaining hands. Michaels, take the back. Rodriguez, the side window. Cole, you're with me at the front. As the men took their positions, Joseph paused, looking at Garrett intently. Why did you come back, Cole? After all this time? Garrett met the older man's gaze steadily. A debt unpaid, and perhaps, his eyes flickered briefly toward Tessa, something more. Before Joseph could respond, a voice called out from beyond the front porch. Morgan, come out and face me, you old fool. Joseph moved to the door, staying to one side as he called back. What do you want, Wilkes? What's rightfully mine? Jasper Wilkes shouted. This land should have been mine years ago. The bank foreclosure is just making it official. The loan's not due for 2 more days, Joseph replied, and my niece has brought the money to pay it off. A harsh laugh answered him. Too bad the bank president had an unfortunate accident this morning. Fell right off his horse, broke his neck. His replacement, who happens to be my cousin, has accelerated the timeline. Your land is forfeit as of noon today. Tessa gasped. The implications clear. Wilkes had murdered the bank president to ensure the foreclosure went through, regardless of payment. Joseph's face darkened with rage. You'll never get away with this, Wilkes. The territorial marshal is 3 days' ride from here, Wilkes interrupted. A lot can happen in 3 days, Morgan. Tragic accidents, a house fire with no survivors. The possibilities are endless. Garrett moved to Joseph's side, his voice low. He's stalling, keeping us talking while his men get into position. We need to make a stand now. Joseph nodded grimly, then raised his voice again. This is your last warning, Wilkes. Leave my property or face the consequences. I've got a dozen armed men surrounding your house, Morgan. You've got what, 4, 5? The odds aren't in your favor. Maybe not, Joseph conceded, but I guarantee you'll be the first to die if shooting starts. A tense silence followed this declaration. Then Wilkes spoke again, his voice closer now. I'll make you a deal, Morgan. Send out the girl, your niece, as a gesture of good faith. We'll discuss terms like civilized men. Tessa felt a cold fear grip her heart as all eyes in the room turned to her. Joseph's face hardened to granite. Go to hell, Wilkes, he shouted. You'll not lay a finger on my niece while I draw breath. Then perhaps we need to change that condition, Wilkes replied coldly. The first shot shattered the front window, sending glass spraying across the room. Joseph ducked, then returned fire through the broken pane. Garrett joined him, his revolver barking as he picked off a man trying to reach the porch. From the back of the house came the boom of Michael's shotgun, followed by a scream of pain. Rodriguez reported similar success from his position, but warned that more men were approaching from the east side of the property. The firefight intensified, bullets splintering wood and shattering glass throughout the house. Tessa crouched behind a heavy oak sideboard, her derringer clutched in trembling hands as she listened to the chaos erupting around her. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see Wilkes directing his men from behind the cover of a water trough. His face was contorted with rage as he gestured toward the house, clearly ordering an all-out assault. "They're rushing the house," she called out in warning. Garrett and Joseph redoubled their fire, cutting down 2 men who had broken from cover. But there were too many, approaching from too many directions at once. A crash from the kitchen signaled that someone had made it to the back door. Michaels fired his shotgun once more, then fell silent. Rodriguez called out that he was running low on ammunition. "Tessa," Joseph shouted over the gunfire, "get to the cellar." Now, this time, seeing the desperate situation, she didn't argue. She made her way toward the kitchen, staying low to avoid the bullets whistling through the house. As she reached the hallway, a man burst through the back door, revolver raised. Without hesitation, Tessa fired her derringer. The small weapon wasn't accurate at distance, but at 10 feet it didn't need to be. The man staggered, clutching his chest, then collapsed to the floor. Shaking, Tessa stepped over him and continued to the root cellar door. She had just pulled it open when she heard her uncle cry out in pain. "Uncle Joe!" She turned back, torn between escape and concern for her family. "Get down!" Garrett's voice rang out from the front room, followed by rapid gunfire. Making her decision, Tessa rushed back toward the sitting room, her empty derringer still clutched uselessly in her hand. She found Joseph slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. "Told you to run, girl," he grunted, pressing a hand against the injury. "Not without you," she insisted, moving to help him up. Garrett was still at the window, firing methodically at the attackers, but Tessa could see he was down to his last few bullets. Rodriguez had fallen silent, and smoke was beginning to filter into the room they had set fire to the east side of the house. "We need to get out," Tessa urged, supporting her uncle's weight. "The tunnel, it's our only chance." Joseph nodded weakly, allowing her to guide him toward the hallway. "Cole," he called, "time to go." Garrett fired his last shot, then joined them, helping support Joseph from the other side. "The back way clear, one man," Tessa confirmed. "I dealt with him." Something like respect flashed in Garrett's eyes as they hurried toward the root cellar. The smoke was thickening rapidly, and flames were visible through the kitchen window, licking at the outer walls. They descended the narrow steps into the cool darkness of the cellar, Garrett closing the door behind them as shots continued to pepper the house above. Joseph directed them to a large barrel that, when moved, revealed a trapdoor set into the dirt floor. "Built this after the last Indian raid," Joseph explained weakly as Garrett pulled the door open. "Never thought I'd need it against white men." The tunnel beyond was narrow and dark, barely tall enough for Garrett to stand upright. Tessa took a lantern from a hook on the wall, lighting it with trembling hands. "I'll go first," she said, holding the light high. "Uncle, you follow. Garrett, bring up the rear." They moved as quickly as Joseph's injury would allow, the sounds of gunfire and the crackling of flames fading behind them as they progressed through the earthen passage. The air grew cooler and damper the further they went, until finally, after what seemed an eternity, they reached a ladder leading up to another trapdoor. "We're near the creek," Joseph whispered, his voice weak from pain and exertion. "There's a small hunting cabin another mile upstream." Williams and Peters know to meet there if there's trouble. Tessa climbed the ladder and cautiously pushed open the trapdoor. Daylight filtered in, along with the sound of running water. She emerged onto a small bank hidden by a thicket of willows, the creek gurgling peacefully nearby, oblivious to the violence they had just escaped. With Garrett's help, she got Joseph through the opening and settled him against a tree. His face was pale, the bloodstain on his shirt now alarmingly large. "He needs a doctor," she said worriedly, tearing strips from her petticoat to fashion a makeshift bandage. "The nearest one's in Silver Creek," Garrett replied grimly, scanning the tree line for any sign of pursuit. "And that's not an option." "The cabin," Joseph suggested, his voice barely audible. "Medicine box there, and Williams was a field surgeon during the war." Tessa nodded, securing the bandage around her uncle's shoulder. "Can you walk a little further?" "Have to, don't I?" Joseph attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just give me a moment." While they rested, Garrett made his way carefully to higher ground, surveying the distance they had come. Black smoke billowed from the direction of the ranch house, and he could see riders circling the property. "They're searching for us," he reported when he returned, "but they're looking in the wrong direction, heading toward town." "Wilkes will assume we fled that way," Joseph said. "When he doesn't find us, he'll be back. We don't have much time." With renewed urgency, they set off along the creek bank, moving as quietly as their burden would allow. Joseph grew weaker with each step, increasingly leaning on Garrett for support. By the time the small hunting cabin came into view, nestled among pine trees on a slight rise above the creek, he was barely conscious. The cabin door opened as they approached, and two men emerged with rifles raised. They lowered their weapons immediately upon recognizing Joseph. "Mr. Morgan." The older of the two rushed forward, taking in the situation at a glance. "What happened, Wilkes?" Tessa explained breathlessly as they helped Joseph inside. "He attacked the ranch, set it ablaze." The cabin was small but sturdy, with a single room containing a stone fireplace, 2 cots, and basic supplies. The man Tessa presumed was Williams immediately set to work examining Joseph's wound, his experienced hands gentle but efficient. "Bullet's still in there," he reported grimly. "I need to get it out before infection sets in." While Williams prepared to operate with the limited tools available, Peters kept watch at the window, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Saw the smoke when we were heading back from town. Came straight here like Mr. Morgan always said to do if there was trouble." "Did you hear anything in town?" Garrett asked, helping position Joseph on one of the cots. Peters nodded. "Plenty. Bank president was found dead this morning. Word is he was thrown from his horse, but Jenkins at the livery said the horse came back calm as could be, not like it had just thrown and killed its rider." "Murder," Tessa said, confirming what they already suspected. "To ensure the foreclosure went through." "That's not all," Peters continued. "Wilkes has been gathering men for days, brought in gunslingers from as far as Cheyenne. Everyone in town knows he's making a play for the Morgan property, but nobody dares speak against him." Williams looked up from his preparations. "Miss Tessa, I need your help. Hold this lamp steady. Cole, I'll need you to hold him down. This won't be pretty." As Williams worked to extract the bullet from Joseph's shoulder, Tessa maintained her composure despite the gruesome procedure, her face set in determined lines as she provided light and assistance. Garrett admired her strength. Most women of his acquaintance would have swooned at the sight of so much blood. Yet she remained steady, her concern for her uncle overriding any squeamishness. When the operation was finally complete, Joseph lay unconscious but breathing steadily, the wound cleaned and bandaged. Williams washed the blood from his hands in a basin of water, his expression cautiously optimistic. If infection doesn't set in, he should recover. But he needs rest a week at least before he can travel. We don't have a week, Garrett said, moving to the window where Peters still kept watch. Wilkes won't stop searching until he finds us or confirms we're dead. What about the territorial marshal? Tessa asked, gently bathing her uncle's forehead with a cool cloth. Surely if we can get word to him. 3 days' ride to Fort Laramie, Peters replied, and that's if the weather holds and Indians don't cause trouble. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as they contemplated their limited options. Finally, Garrett spoke, his decision made. I'll ride to Fort Laramie, get the marshal and bring back help. Alone, Tessa looked up, alarm evident in her eyes. That's too dangerous. Wilkes has men watching all the trails. I know these mountains better than most, Garrett assured her. I can avoid the main trails, travel at night if necessary. You'll need a horse, Williams pointed out, and yours is injured. There's a Mustang in the corral out back, Peters offered. Not as fine as your stallion, but strong and sure-footed in rough country. Tessa rose from her uncle's bedside, her mind made up. I'm coming with you. Garrett shook his head firmly. Your uncle needs you here, and 2 riders are easier to spot than 1. But he's right, Miss Tessa, Williams interjected gently. Your uncle's going to need careful tending, and if Wilkes's men do find this place, you're the only family Mr. Morgan has left to inherit the ranch. You need to survive. Tessa wanted to argue further, but the logic was undeniable. She nodded reluctantly, then approached Garrett, her voice low so only he could hear. Promise me you'll come back. Something shifted in Garrett's expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight relaxation of the perpetual vigilance he carried. I promise. As Garrett prepared to leave, gathering supplies and studying the crude map Peters had drawn of the back country routes to Fort Laramie, Tessa found herself watching him with a growing awareness of how quickly this man had become important to her. In the space of a day, he had risked his life for her multiple times, shown extraordinary courage and integrity, and earned her trust in a way few men ever had. When it was time for him to depart, she walked with him to the corral where the Mustang, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, had been saddled and prepared. 3 days to Fort Laramie, Garrett said, checking the cinch one final time. Another 3 back with the marshal and his men. Can you hold out that long? We'll manage, Tessa assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her. A week was a long time when every hour might bring Wilkes and his men to their doorstep. As if reading her thoughts, Garrett reached into his boot and produced a small revolver, offering it to her. 5 shots. Make them count if you need to. Tessa accepted the weapon, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Thank you for everything. Garrett mounted the Mustang, adjusting himself in the unfamiliar saddle. In the fading light of evening, with his hat pulled low and his features set in determined lines, he looked every inch the frontier hero the kind of man legends were made about. If I'm not back in 7 days, he said quietly, get your uncle to safety. Don't wait for me. Before Tessa could respond, he leaned down suddenly, his hand gently cupping the back of her neck as he pressed his lips to hers in a brief but fervent kiss. Then, without another word, he spurred the Mustang forward, disappearing into the gathering darkness of the pine forest. Tessa stood watching long after he had vanished from sight, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Only when the last hoof-beat had faded did she turn back to the cabin, a new resolve strengthening her spine. 7 days. They would survive 7 days, and Garrett Cole would return. She would accept no other outcome. Inside the cabin, Williams had finished arranging a more comfortable bed for Joseph, using blankets and pine boughs. The older man was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady, and his skin had lost some of its alarming pallor. "He's strong," Williams assured her, noting her concern. "I've seen men survive worse." "We need to prepare," Tessa said, her mind shifting to practical matters. "If Wilkes's men find us, we'll need to defend this place." Peters nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit, Miss Tessa. We've got rifles, ammunition, and enough supplies to last a couple of weeks if we're careful." "What about water?" Tessa asked, mentally cataloging their needs. "Creek's just down the slope," Williams replied. "Fresh and clean. We can fill the barrels under cover of darkness." As they discussed strategies and preparations, Tessa found herself repeatedly glancing toward the door, thinking of Garrett riding alone through hostile territory, carrying their hopes with him. She offered a silent prayer for his safety before turning her full attention to the task of ensuring their survival until his return. The next few days settled into a tense routine. Tessa tended to her uncle, whose condition improved steadily though he remained weak. Williams and Peters took turns standing watch, one always vigilant while the other rested. They kept the cabin dark at night, using the fireplace only during daylight when the smoke would be less noticeable. On the third day, Joseph was strong enough to sit up and take broth. His first coherent question was about Garrett Cole. Did he make it out? Tessa explained Garrett's mission to Fort Laramie, watching relief cross her uncle's face. "Good man," Joseph murmured. "Always was." He reached for Tessa's hand, squeezing it weakly. "I'm sorry about the ranch, girl." "Your inheritance." "Don't talk like that," Tessa admonished gently. "We'll rebuild. Once the marshal arrests Wilkes and his gang, we'll start over." Joseph's eyes, so like her own, studied her face. "You've grown fond of him, Cole." It wasn't a question. Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks but didn't deny it. "He saved my life, multiple times. That all it is? Gratitude?" Tessa looked away, unsure how to articulate the complicated emotions that had developed so rapidly. "I barely know him." "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Joseph said softly. "When I met your Aunt Martha, I knew within a day she was the one. Heart has its own timeline." Before Tessa could respond, Peters burst through the door, his expression urgent. "Riders, coming up from the creek. Looks like Wilkes's men." Tessa's heart froze. "How many?" "5 that I can see." But there could be more. Williams was already reaching for his rifle. "We knew this might happen. We're ready." Joseph struggled to sit up further. "Help me up. I won't lie here while you fight." "Uncle, you're not strong enough," Tessa protested. "Strong enough to shoot," he insisted grimly. "Get me to the window." As they positioned Joseph with a rifle by one window, Williams and Peters took up positions at the other points of defense. Tessa checked Garrett's revolver, ensuring it was loaded and ready. "Miss Tessa, take cover behind that trunk," Williams instructed. "Only shoot if they get inside." She nodded, but remained standing, peering carefully through a gap in the window shutters. The riders were visible now, moving cautiously through the trees. She recognized Jasper Wilkes at their head, his silver hair gleaming in the dappled sunlight. "They know we're here," Peters whispered. "Must have tracked us from the tunnel exit. Or tortured it out of one of the other hands," Williams suggested grimly. Joseph's face darkened with anger and grief. "Rodriguez, Michaels?" "Don't know," Peters admitted. "But Wilkes isn't known for his mercy." Outside, the riders had stopped just beyond clearing range, dismounting to continue on foot. Wilkes gestured for his men to spread out, encircling the cabin. "Morgan," Wilkes called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still mountain air. "I know you're in there. Come out now and I might let your niece live." Joseph's grip tightened on his rifle. "Go to hell, Wilkes," he muttered, though not loudly enough to be heard outside. "You've got 1 minute to show yourselves," Wilkes continued. After that, We burn you out like the vermin you are." Tessa exchanged glances with the others, fear and determination mingling in her expression. They were outnumbered, with a wounded man to protect and limited ammunition. Their only hope was to hold out long enough for Garrett to return with help, a prospect that seemed increasingly unlikely as Wilkes's men positioned themselves for attack. "What do we do?" she asked softly. Joseph's weathered face was set in grim lines. "We fight. And pray Cole rides like the devil himself." As Wilkes's ultimatum expired, the first shots rang out, bullets splintering the cabin's wooden walls. The battle for survival had begun, with only courage and desperation standing between them and certain death. For 2 days, they held their position in the cabin, conserving ammunition and water as they repelled periodic attacks from Wilkes's men. The enemy seemed content to lay siege rather than risk a direct assault after their first attempt had cost them 2 men. By the morning of the 3rd day, the 6th, since Garrett's departure, their situation had grown dire. Food was running low, and Joseph's wound had begun to show signs of infection despite Williams's best efforts. Tessa took her turn at watch, her eyes burning from lack of sleep as she scanned the tree line for any sign of movement. "Anything?" Peters asked, joining her at the window with a cup of precious water. She shook her head. "Nothing since dawn. They're still out there, though. I can feel it." Peters nodded grimly. "Waiting us out, smart. They know we can't last much longer." Tessa glanced back at her uncle, who slept fitfully on his makeshift bed. "How is he?" "Fever's worse," Peters admitted. "Williams has done all he can, but—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Without proper medical attention, Joseph Morgan would not survive much longer. The knowledge settled like a stone in Tessa's heart. "Cole should have been back by now," Peters said quietly. "If he made it through." "He made it," Tessa insisted, more forcefully than she intended. "He promised to come back." Peters said nothing, but his expression was sympathetic. They both knew that promises meant little in this harsh wilderness where death could come from a bandit's bullet, an Indian arrow, or the countless natural dangers of the frontier. As the day wore on, Tessa found herself increasingly drawn to the eastern window, searching the horizon for any sign of approaching riders. By late afternoon, with the sun beginning to sink behind the western mountains, her hope had begun to fade. "Miss Tessa," Williams called softly from her uncle's bedside. "He's asking for you." She hurried to Joseph's side, alarmed by the gray pallor of his skin and the bright fever spots on his cheeks. His eyes, when they opened to look at her, were glassy but lucid. "Tessa," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "need to tell you something." "Save your strength, Uncle," she urged, taking his hand. He shook his head weakly. "No time for that. Listen, the ranch. There's more than cattle making it valuable." Tessa frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "Gold," Joseph breathed. "In the North Creek bed, found it years ago, never told anyone except your father." He coughed, the effort clearly painful. "That's why Wilkes wants the land so bad. Somehow, he found out." Tessa sat back, stunned by the revelation. It explained Wilkes's determination to acquire the property, his willingness to murder and destroy to get what he wanted. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. "Wanted to protect you," Joseph replied, his eyes drifting closed. "Too dangerous. Too many would kill for it." His voice trailed off as he slipped back into unconsciousness. Tessa looked up at Williams, who shook his head slightly, his expression grave. They both knew Joseph was fading fast. A sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Peters called from the window, "Riders coming." At least a dozen from the east. Tessa's heart leaped. Could it be Garrett, returning with the marshal and his men? Or was it reinforcements for Wilkes, come to end their resistance once and for all? She rushed to the window, straining to see through the gathering dusk. The riders were still distant, moving at a gallop across the open meadow that stretched between the forest and the foothills. "Can you make them out?" she asked anxiously. Peters squinted, then his weathered face broke into the first smile Tessa had seen in days. "Cavalry uniforms. And that rider in front. Looks like Cole." Relief washed over Tessa in a dizzying wave. "Thank God," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "Thank God." The approaching riders had been spotted by Wilkes's men as well. Shouts of alarm echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of horses being hastily mounted. "They're running," Williams reported from the other window. "Heading west, fast as they can go." Tessa wanted nothing more than to rush outside, to race across the meadow toward the approaching riders toward Garrett. But caution kept her within the cabin's walls until she could be certain of their safety. As the riders drew closer, she could make out Garrett at their head, alongside a uniformed officer she assumed was the territorial marshal. Behind them rode a contingent of cavalry soldiers, their blue uniforms and gleaming rifles a welcome sight after days of fear and desperation. When they reached the clearing before the cabin, Garrett dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward the door with long, urgent steps. Tessa could wait no longer. She threw the door open and ran to meet him, heedless of potential danger. "Garrett," she called, her voice breaking with emotion. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly against his chest as if afraid she might vanish. "Tessa," he breathed into her hair. "Thank God you're safe." For a moment they clung to each other, the rest of the world fading away in the relief of reunion. Then Tessa pulled back slightly, urgency in her voice. "My uncle, he's very ill. The wound has festered." Garrett turned to the marshal, a tall man with a gray mustache and stern features. "Marshal Davis, we need the surgeon." The marshal nodded, signaling to one of his men. "Dr. Phillips, see to the wounded man immediately." As the military surgeon hurried into the cabin with his medical bag, Tessa quickly explained to Garrett and the marshal what had transpired during their siege and what her uncle had revealed about the true value of their land. "Gold," the marshal mused, stroking his mustache. "That explains Wilkes's determination and his desperation." "Will you go after him?" Tessa asked. "Already have men in pursuit," Marshal Davis assured her. "Wilkes won't get far. The territorial governor has taken a personal interest in this case: land theft, murder, assault on innocent citizens. When we catch him, he'll hang." While they talked, the surgeon worked on Joseph inside the cabin. After what seemed an eternity, he emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I've cleaned the wound properly and given him medicine for the infection," he reported. "He's weak, but with proper care he should recover. However, he needs to be moved to a proper facility as soon as possible." "We'll take him to Fort Laramie," the marshal decided. "The infirmary there is well equipped." Preparations were made to transport Joseph in a wagon the soldiers had brought. As Tessa gathered their few belongings, Garrett took her aside, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said, leading her a short distance from the others. "About why I was really coming to Silver Creek." Tessa waited, a flutter of apprehension in her chest. "I received word that Marcus Morgan's gang was regrouping," Garrett explained. "The men who rode with your uncle's brother, they've been causing trouble across 3 territories. Marshal Davis asked me to investigate rumors that they were based near Silver Creek." "And are they?" Tessa asked, connecting pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Garrett nodded grimly. "Jasper Wilkes has been financing them, using them as muscle for his land grabs while they use his protection to hide their other activities. Your uncle's ranch was valuable for more than just the gold. Its location makes it perfect for moving stolen cattle across territorial lines." The revelation was staggering. "So this was never just about our land." "No," Garrett confirmed. "It's part of something much larger, which is why the governor authorized the marshal to bring a full cavalry detachment. This isn't just about saving your uncle's ranch anymore, it's about breaking up one of the largest criminal operations in the territory." Tessa absorbed this information, her mind racing with implications. "What happens now?" "Now," Garrett said, taking her hands in his, "we get your uncle the medical care he needs. Then we rebuild what Wilkes destroyed." His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "If that's what you want." The question behind his words was clear. Tessa felt a warmth spread through her chest, a certainty that had been growing since the moment this man had walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon and changed the course of her life. "It is," she replied softly, "but I don't want to do it alone." Garrett's expression softened, a smile touching his lips. "You won't have to." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow, they stood together watching the soldiers prepare to depart. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be Wilkes to bring to justice, a ranch to rebuild, and countless challenges to overcome. But for the first time since leaving Cheyenne with her hard-earned savings, Tessa felt hope blooming within her, hope for her uncle's recovery, for the future of the ranch, and for the unexpected love that had found her in the midst of danger and chaos. 4 months later, the Cooper Creek Ranch stood renewed against the backdrop of the Wyoming mountains. The barn had been rebuilt, stronger than before, and the main house repaired and expanded. Cattle grazed peacefully in the lush summer pastures, while the North Creek, its secret still known only to a few, continued to yield small but valuable deposits of gold that were carefully invested back into the ranch's operations. Joseph Morgan had recovered, though he walked with a more pronounced limp and tired more easily than before. He had turned over the daily management of the ranch to Garrett, whose experience and leadership had quickly earned the respect of the hands. In Silver Creek, changes had come as well. With Jasper Wilkes and his gang captured and awaiting trial in Cheyenne, the town had begun to thrive under honest leadership. The new bank president, appointed directly by the territorial governor, had revised many of the predatory lending practices that had threatened small ranchers and farmers. On a perfect June morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and birdsong filling the air, Tessa stood on the front porch of the ranch house, watching as riders approached from the direction of town. She recognized Marshal Davis at the head of the small group, his distinctive figure unmistakable even at a distance. Garrett joined her, slipping an arm around her waist as they waited for the visitors to arrive. The simple gold band on his left hand caught the sunlight, a match to the one Tessa wore on her own finger. Their wedding 3 weeks earlier had been a small affair, attended by Joseph, the ranch hands, and a few friends from Silver Creek and Fort Laramie. "News from Cheyenne," Marshal Davis announced as he dismounted. "Thought you'd want to hear it in person." They welcomed him inside, where Joseph was seated in his favorite chair by the window. After refreshments were served, the marshal delivered the news they had been waiting for. "Wilkes and his top men have been sentenced, hanging scheduled for next month." His expression was solemn but satisfied. "Justice has been served," Joseph nodded gravely. "And the others, prison terms of varying lengths," the marshal replied. "And we've identified 3 more corrupt officials who were on Wilkes's payroll. The governor's determined to clean house completely." As they discussed the details of the trial and sentencing, Tessa found her attention drawn to Garrett, watching as he engaged with the marshal on equal terms. He had changed in subtle ways since their first meeting. There was a peace about him now, a sense of purpose and belonging that had been absent in the lone figure who had ridden into Silver Creek that fateful night. Later, as they walked the marshal to his horse, he turned to them with a thoughtful expression. "The governor's establishing a new marshal's office in Silver Creek. Territory's growing, needs more law enforcement. I've recommended Cole for the position if he's interested." Surprise registered on Garrett's face. "Me," Marshal Davis nodded. "You've got the experience, the respect of the community, and the good sense to know when to draw your gun and when to keep it holstered. Plus," he added with a rare smile, "you've got something to fight for now. Makes a man a better lawman, having roots." After the marshal and his men had departed, Garrett and Tessa walked hand in hand toward the creek that marked the northern boundary of the ranch. It was their favorite spot, peaceful and private, with a small bench Joseph had built beneath a spreading cottonwood tree. "Marshal of Silver Creek," Tessa mused as they sat together, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "It has a nice ring to it." Garrett looked thoughtful. "It would mean dividing my time between here and town." "The ranch is running smoothly," Tessa pointed out. "Williams and Peters have proven themselves capable foremen, and Uncle Joe is getting stronger every day." "What about you?" Garrett asked, his blue eyes searching hers. "The town school needs a teacher. The children are currently learning from Mrs. Peterson, who freely admits her education ended after the third reader." Tessa smiled, recalling her days as a schoolteacher in Cheyenne. She had enjoyed the work, finding satisfaction in shaping young minds. "I've missed teaching," she admitted. "So we could both serve the community," Garrett suggested. "Marshal and schoolteacher by day, ranchers by night and weekends." "Quite the ambitious plan, Mr. Cole," Tessa teased, leaning against his shoulder. "I have an ambitious wife, Mrs. Cole," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "One who deserves every opportunity to use her considerable talents." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future neither could have imagined when Tessa was dragged into the Silver Dollar Saloon that night, or when Garrett fought his way inside to carry her out. "You ever think about it?" Tessa asked softly. "How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't come to Silver Creek when you did?" Garrett's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I try not to. Some things are best not dwelled upon." "I'm glad you came," Tessa said, looking up at him with all the love she felt reflected in her eyes. "Not just because you saved my life, but because you gave me a new one better than I could have imagined." "You did the same for me," Garrett replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I was just existing before, moving from place to place, taking jobs that kept me too busy to think about what I'd lost. You gave me a reason to live again, not just survive." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, they made their way back to the ranch house where Joseph waited on the porch, a peaceful smile on his weathered face as he watched them approach. The scent of supper cooking wafted from the open door, while the sounds of the hands returning from their day's work created a pleasant backdrop of activity and life. This was home. Tessa realized not just the buildings or the land, but the people who inhabited it. The family she had nearly lost, and the one she had unexpectedly found. As she climbed the porch steps hand in hand with Garrett, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, through danger and despair to this moment of perfect contentment. And in the years that followed as Garrett served with distinction as marshal of a growing Silver Creek, as Tessa's school flourished, as their family expanded with the birth of children who would grow up knowing both the value of hard work and the importance of love and loyalty, they would sometimes recall those desperate days when fate had thrown them together, marveling at how the worst moments of their lives had ultimately led them to the best. For Tessa Morgan Cole, who had once been dragged into a saloon by force, only to be carried out by the man who would become the center of her world, Life had come full circle. The danger had passed, justice had been served, and love, unexpected, powerful, enduring love, had transformed two wounded souls into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. And that, she knew, was the greatest fortune of all, worth more than any gold hidden in a creek bed, more precious than any ranch or property. It was the treasure she had never known to seek, yet had found in the most unlikely of circumstances. A love born in danger, tempered by adversity, and destined to last a lifetime.